Well, hello there, you perfectly lovely little people. My name is Sarah and I'm reading from 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith. This evening I am reading the second part of the chapter, In the Enemy's Camp. The full moon was rising above the black house. "Colonel, what is that on the roof?" said Pongo. "Surely it isn't television." "Here?" "Oh, yes, it is," said the Colonel. "And there's scarcely a cottage in the village hasn't got it since the electricity came. Mostly on the hire purchase, though there won't be much purchase here. I'm told the Baddens haven't paid anything for months." He then outlined his plans, and it soon appeared that television played an important part in them. The Baden brothers were so fond of it that they could not bear any puppy to bark while it was on. And unless the puppies were warm, they barked like mad. The warmest room in the house was the kitchen, which was where the television set was. So that was where the puppies now lived, unless they were taking exercise in the stable yard. Some pups liked watching the television, some just slept. Anyway, none of them barked. So the Baddens could enjoy themselves in peace. All this the Colonel had heard from Lucky during long barked conversations. "That lad of yours is as bright as a button," said the Colonel. "He's months ahead of his age." Pongo and Missis swelled with pride. The plan was that Lucky should bring his brothers and sisters out to the stable yard while the Baddens were watching television. "But it'll be too cold for them to stay out long," said the Colonel, "and I don't see why you shouldn't go back into the kitchen with them. Lucky tells me there's no light except from the TV screen, so if you crouch down you should be quite safe. Even if the Baddens do see you, they'll just think you're two of the larger pups. But there's hardly any chance you will be seen because Lucky tells me the Baddens stay glued to the TV until it ends and then roll over and go to sleep. They've got mattresses on the kitchen floor. I can see no reason why you shouldn't spend the night there. I'll call you at dawn and you can get out before the Baddens wake." Pongo and Missis thought this was a wonderful idea. "Can we sleep there every night?" asked Missis. The Colonel said he hoped so, and that it was at night that the pups would have to be drilled and trained for their march to London. "Lucky says that nothing wakes the Baddens, so I plan to come into the kitchen. I shall hold classes there and drill 10 pups at a time in the stable yard. But you two must spend a quiet night there first and report the conditions to me." By now they were almost at the stable yard. "Don't tell me any more now, Colonel," said Pongo. "I'm too excited to take it in. Are you all right, Missis?" For Missis was trembling. "I can't believe it. I am really going to see them," she said. The Colonel opened the gate to the stable yard. Missis gave a soft moan and hurled herself across the yard. She had seen Lucky. There he stood at the back door waiting for them, and behind him, in the long dark passage leading to the kitchen, were all his brothers and sisters. Who could describe what the mother and the father felt during the next few minutes as they tried to cuddle 15 wagging, wriggling, licking puppies all at once? Everyone tried to be quiet, but there were so many whimpers of bliss, so much happy snuffling, that the sheepdog got nervous. "Will they hear in there?" he asked Lucky. "What, the Baddens?" said Lucky, rather indistinctly, because he had his mother's ear in his mouth. "No, they've got their precious television on extra loud." Still, the Colonel was relieved when the first joy of the meeting was over. "Quiet now," said Pongo. "Quiet as mice," said Missis. But they were pleasantly surprised at how quiet the pups instantly were. The only sound came from some dead leaves stirred by 15 lashing little tails. "Now, still," said Lucky. All the tails stopped wagging. "I'm teaching them to obey orders," said Lucky to the Colonel. Good boy, good boy. Let's see. I make you a corporal this afternoon, didn't I? Now I make you a sergeant. If all goes well, you shall have your commission next week. Now I'm off to see my little pet Tommy having his bath." He told Pongo he'd be back in a couple of hours. Slip out and tell me what you think of things, or send the sergeant with a message." "Won't you come in and see the TV, sir?" said Lucky. "Not while the bad uns are awake," said the Colonel. "Even they couldn't mistake me for a Dalmatian." As soon as he had gone, Lucky sent the other puppies to the kitchen, then took his father and mother in. "You must stay at the back until your eyes get used to the dark," he said. And indeed, it was dark. The only light came from the television screen and the kitchen fire, which were at opposite ends of a very large kitchen. And as the walls and ceiling were painted dark red, they reflected no light. It was extremely warm, much warmer than one fire could have made it. This was because there was central heating. Cruella de Vil had put it in when she planned to live in the house. At last, Pongo and Missis found that they could see fairly well, and it was a strange sight they saw. Only a few feet away from the television, two men lay sprawled on an old mattress, their eyes fixed on the screen. Behind them were ranged row after row of puppies, small pups at the front, large pups at the back. Those who did not care for television were asleep around the kitchen fire. The hot, red room was curiously cosy, though Pongo felt it was a bit like being inside a giant's mouth. Lucky whispered, "I thought we could settle Mother with the family, and then I could show you around a bit. All the pups want to get a glimpse of you. Father, are you going to rescue them all?" "I hope so," said Pongo earnestly, wondering more and more how he was going to manage it. "I told them that you would, but they've been pretty nervous. I'll just send the word around that they can count on you." He whispered to a pup at the end of a row, and the word travelled like wind over a cornfield. There was barely a sound that a human ear could have heard, except a couple of tail thumps instantly repressed. All knew that they must not give away the fact that Pongo was in their midst. And when he went silently along the rows, there was scarcely a movement. But he could feel great waves of love and trust rolling towards him, and suddenly all the pups were real and living for him, not just a problem that he had to face. He felt as if he were the father of them all, and he knew that he could never desert them. He felt a strange sympathy for the big pups in the two back rows. Some of them were fully half-grown young dogs rather than puppies, lollopy creatures with clumsy feet. They made him remember his own not very far away youth. He wondered how long their skins would be safe from Cruella. How would she have the patience to wait much longer? Did the pups know that the danger grew closer every day? Something in their eyes told him that they did. And many of them had been in this horrible place for months without hope until Lucky had spread the news that his father and mother were coming. Proud Lucky, now taking his father along the rows of hero-worshipping pups. Blissfully happy, Missis sat with her children clustered around her. She had eyes only for them, but they were determined that she should not miss the television. She had never seen it before. Mr. and Mrs. Dearly did not care for it. They found it rather difficult to follow. The pups did not follow it completely, as they'd not yet learnt enough human words, but they liked the little moving figures and watched in a perpetual hope of seeing dogs on the screen. "Can we have it when we get back home?" said the cad pig. "Indeed you shall, my darling," said Mrs. Somehow. The Dearlys must be made to buy a set. Pongo had now silently met all the pups. He told Lucky he would like to have a good look at the bad uns. So Lucky took him a little way up the back staircase, where he could be seen without being noticed. No one would have guessed that Saul and Jasper Baden were brothers. Saul was heavy and dark, with a forehead so low that his bushy eyebrows often got tangled up with his matted hair. Ugh. Jasper was thin and fair, with a chin so sharp and pointed that it had worn holes in all of his shirts. Not that he had many. Both brothers looked very dirty. "They never change their awful old clothes," whispered Lucky. "And they never wash. I don't think they're real humans, Father. Is there such a thing as a half-human?" Pongo could well believe it after seeing the bad uns, but he couldn't imagine what their non-human half was. It was no animal he'd ever seen. "Have they ill-treated any of you?" he asked anxiously. "No, they're too frightened of being bitten," said Lucky. "They're terrible cowards. Some of the big pups did think of attacking them, but there seemed no way of getting out. And if they'd killed the bad uns, there would have been no one to come and feed us. Oh, Father, how glad I am that you have come." Pongo licked his son's ear. Pups, like boys, do not like fathers to be too sentimental. Mothers are different, but this was a very private matter. Then, when they went and sat with Missis and the family, it seemed strange that they could all be so peaceful right in the enemy's camp. Gradually, the Pongo's puppies fell asleep, all except for Lucky, Patch and the cad pig. Lucky was not sleepy. Patch was, but stayed awake because the cad pig was awake. And the cad pig stayed awake because she was crazy about television. Many of the big pups, too, were lying down to sleep, stretching luxuriously, feeling for the first time since they had been imprisoned in Hell Hall that there was someone they could rely on. Pongo had come, and Missis too. They had looked at her shyly, quite understanding that she must care for her own children first, but hoping that she would have little time for them later. Some of them could hardly remember their mothers, but the younger pups could remember theirs, and they were not sleeping. Slowly, silently, they were inching their way towards Missis. She'd been watching the television, beginning to get the hang of it with the cad pig's help. Then some tiny sound close at hand brought her attention back to her family. But the sound did not come from her family. There were now nearly 30 puppies, not so very much bigger than her own, just a few feet away, all staring at her hopefully. Goodness, they're grubby, was her first thought. Didn't their mothers teach them to wash themselves? Then she felt a pang of pity. What mother had any of them now? She smiled at them all and wrinkled their little noses in a return smile. Then she looked beyond them to the larger pups. Some of the half-grown girls reminded her of herself at that age. So slim, so silly. They knew how to wash themselves, but there were many things that they didn't know, many ways in which they needed a mother's advice. And suddenly, all the puppies were her puppies. She was their mother, just as Pongo had felt he was their father. And indeed, the younger ones, creeping closer and closer, were now so mingled up with her own she could scarcely tell where her little family ended and the larger family began. Drowsiness spread through the warm red room. Even the Baden brothers dozed. They did not much like the programmes that were on the television and wanted to be fresh for their favourite programme, which was due later. Even Missis slept a little, knowing that Pongo would keep watch. At last, only 3 pairs of eyes were open. Pongo was wide awake, thinking. Lucky was wide awake, for he thought of himself as a sentry who must not sleep on duty. And the cad pig was wide awake, watching her lovely television. Suddenly there was a thunder of thumps at the front door. The sleeping pups awoke in alarm. The Baden brothers lumbered to their feet and stumbled towards the door. But before they got there, it had been flung open. Outside, against the moonlit sky, stood a figure in a long white cloak. It was Cruella de Vil. Eek! Well, that was exciting too. I hope you've all had a very nice wash, and I hope you've cleaned your teeth. And I hope you've washed your hands. And now you know what to do. You go to bed and you give yourself a great big cuddle. And I will see you tomorrow.